Welcome everyone to the Compello and 99x Technology webinar on virtual co-creation for ISVs. I hope I'm loud and clear to all of you. Today, we have two experienced speakers to share their knowledge and insights on working with distributed teams. On one end, we have the CTO of Norway-based Compello, Torgeir Lyngstad, and on the other, the CTO of Sri Lanka-based 99x Technology, Hasith Yaggahavita. I'm Cassandra, and I will be the moderator of today's session. As some of you may know, this webinar was in fact scheduled to run before the pandemic hit us. Yet, we believe that this topic remains relevant now more than ever in the post-COVID era, where many of us have had to get used to working with virtual teams, whether based in the same town or different continents. And what we hope to do today is to answer the many questions you may have had about working with distributed teams and show you how such teams can not just work for a product company, but how they can help create value and bring about scalability. Now, let me tell you a bit about our speakers. Torgeir is an experienced technology manager specializing in driving product and technology innovation for cloud-based SaaS businesses. As CTO of Compello, Torgeir is responsible for driving product innovation and heads up Campello's product development and SaaS operations. Hasith leads the engineering division of 99x Technology, an award-winning international software engineering company, as the CTO and a member of its board. With more than 15 years of experience, he has worked through disciplines such as engineering, agile, lean, CSR, HR, marketing, etc., as a catalyst for organizational change. So Torgeir, I'd like to direct the first question to you. It is often argued that product teams should ideally be co-located. But what are your thoughts on this? And what would you say is so special about product development compared to other types of software development?
I think it's difficult to disagree with the original premise that I think the optimal organization is to have everyone in the same room. That kind of minimizes the delays in communication and makes collaboration, of course, the easiest. That being said, very few of us actually have the luxury to be able to organize our development like that, either because we might have multiple offices in the same country, our office space may not have enough room. There have been studies done that show that as soon as you spread people more than 8 meters apart, you basically have a drop, you have an increase in communication overhead because physical distancing kind of make communication a little bit more tricky, even with the modern tools we have today. So kind of absolutely the optimal way I still think is kind of to have everyone in the same room, sitting close together, that is going to work on the same product. But I have now for more than 20 years actually worked with teams where that have not been the case, where distributed teams kind of is a matter of life. And then it's about how do you organize things to work even with those difficulties that can be present in kind of being distributed. As to the other part of the question, kind of what is so special about product development compared to other types of software development, I think there are many things. Of course, if you do a bespoke project for a single customer, you are not really exposed to competition. You are trying to create a solution to solve one specific problem, and that allows you a lot of leeway and freedom in how to do things. When you're trying to create a standard product that's going to be sold both into existing and possibly new markets, where you are exposed to competition, you are talking about a very different discipline. You have to be much more think about flexibility, think about supportability, think about scalability, think about security. So there are a lot more what I would call engineering disciplines that comes much heavier into the picture when you're talking about developing standard products. Hasith, I don't know if you can add some thoughts to that.
Yeah, I agree on the fact that the optimal setup is to have everybody in the same room. And to answer the question why mention a few key points, and also I would like to add one other point: how usually requirements are created for a software product is very different from the way you analyze and create requirements for the enterprise project or the bespoke project. In a bespoke project, usually you get you analyze the business processes in that organization, and you create a clear list of requirements. You basically take it from what is existing. But products, on the other hand, they are expected to be innovative. They need to challenge what is out there in the market as competition. So usually, how you define requirements in a product, more of an innovative process, which optimally done with great collaboration, because creativity and innovation comes through collaboration. So that's one other reason why I think why people often refer as product teams should be co-located.
Given that you kind of do agree that product teams should be co-located, why do we see more and more product vendors moving into globally distributed teams or virtual teams?
If I will start, I can say, I think building a product and kind of having an organization with all the skills required to kind of build a product with all the disciplines you need is actually something that, at least for us and in the companies I've been working with here in Norway in the Oslo region, the competition for talent is fierce. The cost of talent is very high. And to be able to find high competent people that can fill all the roles you need to create market leading products is actually very, very difficult. And it's very, very expensive. So I think by starting to embracing co-location, you get access to a much higher talent pool and more diverse skills. And I think as everyone now have been forced to work remotely during this pandemic, we see that at least for many companies, and that includes Compello, we haven't seen any drop in productivity. If anything, I would say we have seen an increase in productivity overall. So the hit many people were expecting, I think a lot of us have not been experiencing. Back to my original point, kind of getting access to that talent pool, being able to find and hire people that would be very, very difficult to locate in your home market, in your hometown. That, at least for Compello, was one of the major reasons why we started looking into building a virtual co-located team.
Yeah, adding something to that is in a it's quite difficult for you to predict what type of a scalability you would get, because the scalability more or less related to the market success of the product when you launch it. And suddenly it could be millions and billions of users you're acquiring onto your product. And then you might exponentially get a massive amount of requirements to be delivered in a shorter period of time. And that is a little unique in product engineering compared to bespoke application development. In such a model, unless you have access to a wider talent pool than probably in your primary market, it could be challenging. So that's one other strategic reason why product engineering teams have in a few markets.
Yeah, I think maybe Cassandra, that we could exemplify this scalability factor by showing the slides that kind of show the history of Compello working with 99X. Yeah. Just to give you a brief on Compello. So Compello, we are almost 25 years old. We are about 90 people. And we have offices in Oslo and Larvik in Norway. We have Stockholm in Sweden. And then we have, with 99X, we have a team in Colombo in Sri Lanka. And those people we serve, we have just over 1,000 customers who receive invoices from us. And we mainly sell through a network of 70 plus partners. And to give you an idea of what services, if you skip to slide 5, thank you. We basically have services in 4 areas. We have what we call receive services, where we have invoice and document reception services. So we receive both electronic invoices, what we call e-invoices, and we can receive physical invoices that are then scanned and OCR'd. We have what we call process services with invoice and document approval and helping making accounting more intelligent. And then we have what we call send or invoice and document distribution services, where we basically have services where we can receive data that our customer want to distribute to their end customers, and we can then distribute that in any format and any channel that the recipient want to receive the data in. So in Norway, for instance, we do that through access point, we do that through VIPs, we do that through the internet banks, and so on. And finally, we have a service within EDI message exchange, especially for the power and utility companies. But if we go to next slide and see kind of what started the collaboration with 99X, 99X was originally recommended by an existing customer to Compello. They had done an engagement with 99X and were kind of satisfied and said, you should look into 99X now that you want to start look into those services. And we started the engagement with 99X back in 2013. But as you will see, the team size and the scope of services have increased very gradually. So if you go to the next slide, we started with one product and only with the testing services. So we did all development in Norway, but then we had testers working with manual testing in Colombo. After a while, we increased and moved also into not only manual testing, but also into test automation services. And then we added some developers. So we started with just one web developer. And then we found we needed a mobile app. So we were very satisfied with what the work 99X did. So we added some mobile developers as well. And suddenly we had a team of 6. And then we needed to think about how the application looked. So we started first to try to find a local UX resource, but struggled to do that. So we found actually a very good UX resource in Colombo. So we thought, why not have him in Colombo? That just works just as well. And then we moved on. We added new developers. We added another QA. And then in 2018, I think we come to now, next. We also increased, started to add developers for our other products. First 2, and then we have, over the last couple of years, we have increased a lot. So today we have both manual testing, automation testing, and performance testing. We have development services and we have UX services. So this is a picture from our last team gathering in November last year. And here we see both some of the people from Norway and the majority of the team from Colombo. So now we have 28 people in Colombo, and we have 17 people in Oslo and Larvik, and they then work as virtual teams, co-located.
So when you onboard a remote team, Torgeir, like 2 to 28 in a short period of time, what type of challenges do you face there?
I think
what was your main challenge?
It's kind of the main challenge, I think, is to first build the domain competence, because we are working in a niche part of the software industry. So you will struggle to find developers who have experience with the type of services that we are developing. So we invested a lot in building domain competence. So we had workshops, kind of explained it started explaining from the business side, kind of what type of service do you have, what impact does they have on our customers, why are they important, and so on, to kind of build that domain and business understanding before we started to develop into the kind of the more technical aspects of the solutions. And I think also it's very important that when you start an engagement like this, that you invest in spending physical time together. To kind of get to know each other better, because if the only relationship you have with someone is like we have now over Zooms or Teams or Skype or whatever, that is well when you know someone. But to build knowledge, physical interaction, actually being together, not only at work, but also doing things socially as a team, having dinner, having a few drinks in the evening, doing some fun activities, that help kind of build that common team culture. And I think it's only when you have established that you really can work seamlessly together.
Yeah,
so that to me is very, very important.
Yeah, that's very much true in my experience also. I had been onboarding such a distributed teams for more than 100 during last year. And one thing I always tell the stakeholders of the business is that the highest return of investment activity is at physical gathering, even though it can look costly because you need to buy tickets for traveling, and then you need accommodation and all of that for the part of the team. But in my experience, that always pays off. That physical meeting chemistry is very important, at least once a year minimum.
Yeah, I would agree on that. That's important, especially when you start something new, whether that is starting working on a new product or a new big module, or you are, for instance, now in Compello, we have done a lot of work on our cloud strategy. So kind of we've historically had a lot of customers with on-premise solutions, and now over the last few years, we kind of have migrated all over to a cloud and SaaS strategy. And that, of course, also impacts how we build the products. So then to also kind of have workshops where the teams are together to kind of discuss how the future architecture should look like, and so on. We have kind of invested in that. So we both have had teams from Colombo visiting Oslo, and we have had guys from Oslo and Larvik visiting Colombo. And I think that is very good, kind of to have those things, as you say, once a year or however frequent you feel is required. And then you can work very, very effectively as a distributed team when you kind of have that common understanding that it's easier to get through those physical workshops.
Yeah. So if you see this particular image, you see there are two boxes, top one and the bottom one. Top one is, let's say, geography A, primary market. For the sake of argument, let's say this is Norway. And then you have the geography B below, where domain knowledge might actually be low because you are not in the primary market. And in a setup like this, when you have two locations, two teams distributed, if you have a major, quite a large number of and only one or two developers in the secondary market, the propagating domain knowledge becomes a bit of a challenge because it's sometimes quite costly affair to propagate the domain knowledge just for the for those one or two members in the secondary location. So practically what happens is a lot of times the primary market, developers in the primary market tend to work together cohesively and get work done faster than trying to propagate the knowledge down into the secondary market.
Yeah.
If you go to the next, Sorry,
if I can add to that, Hasith, that's actually what we saw in Compello in the beginning, because we had very few people in Sri Lanka initially, and the majority of people were in Norway, and that's what we found, that also that to kind of build the domain knowledge in Sri Lanka then was slow, and that kind of also then tended to also that we kind of the tasks that were given to the Sri Lanka team then were typically more routine. They didn't require as much the domain knowledge, because since they didn't have the domain knowledge, it was easier to kind of give them tasks that didn't require so much domain knowledge. And that again slowed down the building up of competence, because they were so, the teams were so little balanced.
Yes.
They were too imbalanced in the beginning.
Exactly. Because if you show the next image, if you see in contrast the second setup, it doesn't need to be like more people in the geography B, but at least if you balance the number of people where some heavyweight is in the secondary geography, secondary in the sense of domain knowledge, then team has down. And this usually works much better in my experience when you have a distributed team.
And I totally agree with that. I have had the privilege of working with distributed teams. I've always had people in Norway, but I've also had people in, I've had Sri Lanka, of course. I've had people in India. I've had people in Russia, in Romania. I have them in Poland. I've had them in the US. And that's always what I found, is that if you have some type of balance in the teams, the buildup of domain knowledge goes much further, and the productivity of the team as a whole becomes much higher, because suddenly you get what I would call, maybe not physically product owners, but you kind of get people to really have ownership and knows the product and the domain very well in both locations or in all locations. That can then act as mentors to younger, newer team members, because then you're not dependent on kind of your key resources in your primary market. So everyone, because if you have only a few people in the secondary market, in the secondary geography, and you bring on new people, the existing people don't have the deep domain knowledge yet. So you are dependent on the key resources from your primary market to give that domain knowledge. So you always then basically, that's costly. And it also means that typically what are maybe your most productive or most knowledgeable people kind of are spending too much time on skill transfer instead of kind of being key resources in architecture discussions and whatnot they can provide even more value in.
Great. So I think we touched on this during a previous discussion as well, where we were talking about team culture. And it's such a buzzword, but arguably, I guess it is warranted because it is such an important attribute of a high-performing team. So how would you build a winning culture in a product team?
First of all, by realizing that what motivates developers or engineers in general is more or less the same regardless of which geography you're in. And that basically also means that if you want to kind of get a productive team with a good team culture, you should think differently on kind of what type of activities you do to build that culture, whether the team is only in your own office, for instance in Norway, or whether it's a co-located team. It's the same motivational drivers, and that basically means getting people involved, allow everyone to kind of give their opinion, contribute their knowledge, so that you kind of not only have a group of what you could call first-class citizens in your primary geography, and then kind of secondary class citizens that kind of are never involved in discussions or decisions, but kind of only get the result of discussions and decisions. Then you tend to get less motivated because you don't feel the same involvement and the same ownership of the decisions. So to me, that always starts with kind of thinking of, you have to think of all your people are just as valuable, whether they are in your primary or your secondary geography, and kind of make sure you get the input from everyone. Make sure everyone gets the chance to get heard, are involved in discussions, because that also tend to get the best solutions. Because what I have found during my years is that the level of skill we are able to get in Sri Lanka and other geographies is in many times just as high or even higher than what we are able to recruit locally. So not taking advantage of that talent would be a big sin and a big shame. So getting everyone involved, treating everyone the same, investing in kind of being together from time to time, to me is kind of some of the key things in kind of building that culture.
Yeah. Adding to that, one other specialty about product engineering engagements is that usually they are long term. If you see an enterprise project or a bespoke project where you do a project to implement a business process in an enterprise, usually how that project works is you have a development time, primary development time, and then then it goes into sort of a maintenance type of a mode. So the engagement from the developers probably is only for that 6 to 12 months, where the development work is very high, and then it get handed over to a maintenance team. But this is never true in product engineering. You might think sometimes, okay, in a product also you will do the product and launch it to the market, and then you get your maintenance. I have never seen a product like that. So all of the products, you need to continuously develop, because the market keeps changing, competition comes at different times, and also you need seeing more the success, more the demands from the users. And usually product teams tend to grow and same type of a resource pool. And why this is now important in terms of culture is to associate with such a long-term thinking partners when you onboard developers, regardless of if you're onboarding somebody onto your own company, product company, or are you getting involved in an offshore or outsourcing type of involvement. You always need to have that that requirement to find partners who will say, yes, we want to be in this game long term, not to do the project for 3 months and exit and take a different project. So culturally, to build that culture, because culture in a product is more like what is unique in the product is it becomes a part of the culture of the team as well. Your unique value proposition becomes a part of the culture. Then it's very important to look at resources with a long-term view.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, and it's for us, it's very important that, for instance, also that we, when we do our internal, like every 2 weeks, we send out an information email to all employees. When we started this engagement, we found that, okay, the team we have in Sri Lanka is a very important part of our company. So we can no longer just send that out in Scandinavian languages. We needed to include the guys in Sri Lanka because they need to understand how the business is doing, to kind of get that ownership, to get the understanding of what the market is requiring and so on. So we started then to actually producing that newsletter, internal newsletter in English, and also include all team members in Sri Lanka on that. And every year, we are also sharing the company strategy with the team in Sri Lanka, so that they also kind of have the same understanding as the team have in Norway on the overall direction of the company, what are the strategic priorities, because then it's easier to relate that to what we're currently doing in development, to see how that supports the strategy. And that also allows for people in the team in Sri Lanka to kind of sometimes challenge things, to say, okay, but our strategy is like this, and if we do this now in the product, won't that kind of go against the strategy? And that to me that's one of the really good things that's going to show that you have succeeded building a good team culture, is that when people in the secondary geography, in the outsourced location, is actually starting to speak up when they think you're doing something wrong, when you think you're moving in the wrong direction, because that basically means that they feel part of it. They have a claim. They feel a stake in what we're doing. They're not kind of just showing up and grabbing a task from Azure DevOps task board and then going home afterwards. They actually feel involved and have ownership, and that is kind of where we want to end up. And as you said, that is something also that's typically unique to product engineering compared to the bespoke development, is that you are doing this for so extended period that you get a strong sense of ownership over the product, and you want it's your baby, you want it well. So if someone is kind of mistreating your baby, you want to say something.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because in product engineering, you need to, I often say you need to live and breathe the product. I have a question, Torgeir. Cassandra, if you go to the next slide. Torgeir, I have seen 3 different type of team setups during my engagements. In certain team setups, let's say you are doing an ERP solution, you might have a sub-product team, let's say CRM module, and then another sub-product team, accounting module, or the transport module. So these different teams are co-located in a particular geography, as you can see, right? 2 teams in one geography and 2 other teams in the other geography. That's one of the setup I had seen. Cassandra, if you go to the next one. The other setup I had seen is you have a more of a distributed type of, and then I had seen a little organized setup than that also. That is the last setup we see. It's more like the teams are distributed, but also you have a little bit of an organization saying product owners comes from the primary market, or the ops engineer operations team comes from the primary market, and then you might have development and QA in the other market, but the teams are distributed. What's your take on this? Do you see any of these setups being more suitable than the other in product engineering?
I think it depends a little bit on the product and how that's how it's organized, so to speak. But In general, I think that one of the latter two models, so either sub-product teams or sub-product team with co-located discipline teams, to me is what I see more frequently, and that's at least been the case in most of the teams I've been involved with. Because typically what will happen, right? So if we, for instance, talk about Compello, we are a Scandinavian or Norwegian base, but kind of our main focus is Scandinavia. So we have the product owners and we have the majority of the customer base in this geography. And we are closest to the market, so that it's natural that kind of the product owner function and also the operations functions and the customer support functions are close to the end users. We also have some developers, architects, and so on in the local geographies, but the majority of those type of resources we have now in Colombo. And that has been the case for a lot of the companies I've been working on. What I often say is that you can outsource work, but it's much more difficult to outsource ownership, because you want to kind of have control over the ownership of your own product. So typically what you can call the typical ownership roles is something that you typically will have in your main geography.
Yeah.
That is not, that doesn't mean that you don't have any, what I would call owners or leaders in your offshore location or secondary geography.
Geography, yeah.
But it just means that they typically will be more, for instance, in Compello, we have tech leads in Colombo. We have QA leads in Colombo. We have like Scrum Master roles in Colombo, all important leadership roles in our teams. But for us, it would not be natural to have product owners in Colombo, because we feel that the product owners, they need to be close to the customers. They need to have close collaboration with support, with consultants, and also themselves visit customers regularly to kind of understand the requirements, speak to them, learn from them. So that to us would be less natural to have in a secondary geography.
Yeah, yeah. My experience is also pretty much resonate with what you just with sometimes some of these critical roles being in the primary market is a more suitable in my experience also. Because if you go with the first model, one issue is that certain markets might have a better scalability than other market, and the teams who is in a lower scalable market in terms of resources can actually suffer when you expand.
We've spoken a lot about like product engineering and team dynamics, but let's come to the other challenges of managing a virtual team, like privacy, GDPR, domain knowledge. Could you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly with GDPR, right? Having any type of resources outside of the EU EEC region can potentially be difficult in terms of access to data. Either you need to make sure that in your agreements with customers that you kind of have that, because sometimes developers kind of need to look at production systems to help operations, for instance, to analyze something that's wrong. So either you kind of need to secure that possibility in your agreements, or you need to find other ways around it. And the way, for instance, we have done it in Compello is that, first of all, no developers, whether they are in Norway or in Sri Lanka, will normally have access to production environments. They have to be granted specific access to production environment by the operations team. But also what we have done, because most problems in production can be analyzed and problems can be recreated in other environments, test environment, QA environments, and kind of fixed like that. But sometimes you have things that where you need to have access to production data to be able to recreate the issues and solve them. So what we have done, for instance, we have created some data anonymity tools so that we can extract data from production where we have the issues and then run them through an anonymizer function that basically takes out all personal data and make it, yeah, like random data. And then we can insert that data, copy of that data into one of our other environments. And then we can do our analysis on that. So kind of, those are the types of techniques I think you need to use to kind of go around those potential issues. Also, for instance, in Compello, we still have developers in Norway. So we kind of have the skill set also. So if there is a need for kind of investigation into the production environments, then we could also potentially, operations could allow a developer from Norway to go into the production data set, the database, for instance, and analyze things.
Hasith, would you have any thoughts to share about other practical issues like subculture forming, language, managing time zones?
Yes. Time zones can actually be challenging if you have quite a large time difference between the two geographies. Because then the collaboration part suffers. So I think it's, for an example, if you take 99X, that's why we don't have much of larger customer base in the US, but most of our customers are from Europe, because we understand that product engineering requires a certain amount of collaboration for it to be successful in a distributed environment. And we feel that with the time difference between the US and Sri Lanka, that collaboration is practical,
yeah,
the required level of collaboration.
I can also say that we,
yes.
I can also say that just some practical things that we do in our teams is, for instance, the team in Sri Lanka, they eat their lunch a little bit early, and the teams in Norway eat their lunch a little bit late local time. And we do that because the best time for us to work together is typically between, let's say, 8 in the morning and maybe 1 in the afternoon. That's kind of where we are ensured that all team members from all teams are kind of available. So we try to make sure that there are as much time available for co-working, meetings and so on during that time period. So that typically means that we tend to eat towards the end of that time period, and the team in Sri Lanka eats fairly early in that time slot. So in that way, kind of we minimize those type of collisions. So that's kind of, it's just practical things we do. Also, I think some of the things that I think is important when to kind of both build and maintain culture and have good communication flow is to try to avoid email as far as possible. And that is not really only for co-located teams. I would say in general in organizations, we tend to use email far too much. Because the thing with email is it's only available to those whoever is on the to or CC list. So what we try to do is every team in Compello, for instance, we use Microsoft Teams. So we have team groups for every product, for every area we work on, every collaboration project. And we basically encourage people to use the chat for everything that they normally would use for email. Only if there's something that you want to say that should only be read by one person or a certain group of persons should you use email. If not, I say you have to have a very good reason for not using the chat. There are very few things we do kind of are so secret that it cannot be written on a chat. And by doing that, you kind of make sure that all team get access to what's happening in the team. And also if then, for instance, the Colombo team, they arrive a few hours earlier because of the time difference. So they've had some hours working uninterrupted before the Norwegian team comes. But we can still see what they've been doing because every communication in the team has been done on chat. It's not been done on email or just verbally. So we can kind of see what's going on before we come in. And the same time when they come in next morning, they can see what happened after they left work, the few hours that the Norwegian team work isolated at the end of the day. So kind of by using those type of tools, you also increase collaboration and visibility within the teams.
Yeah, very much. I think tooling is a primary success factor in a distributed team. One is, as Torgeir mentioned, communication tools like chats or video conferencing. Video is also very important. You need to see the person on the other side. So we always tend to take a video call, not only an audio type of a conferencing call. And then there's quite a lot of other tools you might actually need to have, automation tools for you to keep the continuous delivery or continuous integration happening, and also even code validation type of automation tools. Probably a lot of process tools as well. It's good to keep everything on some sort of a tool, because then you have the tracers and everything available in case you want to go get back and see.
I would also say that a very effective knowledge transfer and knowledge sharing practice that we try to do is to have cross geography code reviews.
Right.
So kind of we say that any code that go into production has to go through code review. And then we try to say that, okay, someone from geography A, if you have written the code, then someone from geography B should do the code review.
Yeah.
So in that way, you kind of, you make sure that kind of both locations have knowledge of all the code, and you can collaborate across it. And let's say if either someone leaves the team or someone gets sick for an extended period, you have people in both geographies that kind of say, okay, I'm familiar with that code. I know what that does. So you're not as person dependent when it comes to kind of maintenance and stuff. But it's a great way of building knowledge in the team. For instance, pair up one of your senior developers with a newly hired developer, and allow the junior to code review the senior. Is a great learning for the junior, and can be very humbling for the senior. And vice versa, of course, the senior does the code review of the junior. I'm just saying, yeah. So that kind of is very valuable both to the junior and the senior actually, and it's a great way of building competence across the geographies very quickly.
Yeah, that's actually a good practice, and there are quite a lot of code review tools which supports you to do that, and also you can also practice pull request type of review models also.
And I think we're exactly at an hour as well, so I think it would be good if we wrap up also. So Torgeir and Hasith, a big thank you to both of you for sharing your insights. It was kind of, I guess it was a bit on the long side, but I think a lot of interesting topics were definitely discussed, and it was very interesting to have first-hand experiences kind of backing some of your points. So thank you very much for that. And a big thank you to everyone who joined us today as well. I mean, we'd always be happy to even hear from you afterwards, so do feel free to get in touch. So with that, thank you very much, everyone, and have a nice day.